Today I'm going to talk about Durkheim's notion of anomie and how it relates to social problems like crime. In fact, I'm going to talk about the philosophical and theoretical underpinnings of this idea of anomie and how anomie can really be understood as one of the central problems in modern life. And I'm going to apply it specifically to understanding crime in society. Durkheim was one of those brilliant philosophers, sociologists who asked the big questions of what holds society together, how is society possible. And one of his seminal books was a division of labor in society. And so a lot of what I've talked about here with anomie is going to relate to this concept that was laid out very well in the division of labor in society. But the idea of anomie is like the idea of terror, of dread, isolation, meaninglessness. It is what really leads to the profound suffering of human beings in our society. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. And again, like all the great philosophers, for people like Marx, it was the idea of false consciousness rooted in alienation. For people like Max Weber, the central problem of modern life was this idea of growing rationality that permeated multiple spheres of social life, trapping human beings in this iron cage of rationality that they cannot get out of, where the world becomes this bureaucratic machine, just this disenchanting type of world, relieved of excitement and magic. And for Durkheim, it was this idea of anomie rooted in social transformation. And part of this Durkheim was very interested in this movement from pre-modern to modern society, and so he asked what held society together during pre-modern times, and with the advent of modernity, where what once held together the pre-modern world, as all that falls apart and breaks down, what holds society together in that new historical epoch. And so pre-modern society was a world where everyone had the same shared values, beliefs, ideas, traditions, and really performed the same roles. It's where life had this kind of unchanging rhythm rooted in deep-seated traditions. This was a time where uh, uh, Durkheim argues that society was held together by mechanical solidarity, which I'll explain in a moment. But as history unfolded and industrialization took hold, profound changes occurred, not only in society, but also in our consciousness. And these shifts that not only redefined how societies were structured and held together, but it also gave rise to the dark side of modernity, a powerful social force known as anomie, probably the worst word in the English language. Durkheim's theory explains how this transformative journey from kind of a simplicity of mechanical solidarity to a complexity of what he's going to call organic solidarity, and how this would always lead to anomie always lurking at bay as always a potential crisis that can sneak up upon us at any moment. And so the era of mechanical solidarity, of pre-modern society, was the idea of unity through sameness. The world of the pre-modern society, people, the glue that held people together was homogeneity. It was sameness. So you can picture a small village. Everybody knows everybody. And society revolves around shared customs, traditions, roles, values, beliefs. Here there's a strong sense of social cohesion, tightly woven through this strong collective consciousness, a shared moral code that dictates how people should think and how people should behave in their everyday life. Think of it as a mental and a social map that guides everyone's actions, ensuring basically complete conformity. sameness. And this collective consciousness, of course, is incredibly powerful. It shapes the way everyone thinks and feels and acts and the things that they believe. The idea of individuality, you can toss that away. People don't question the norms in a pre-modern society. They follow them because the norms reflect the collective consciousness of the group, their shared values, their customs, their beliefs that is tightly ingrained in the imagination. And in such a society, life is simple. The division of labor is minimal as people perform the same tasks. If there is a division of labor, it's usually along sex and gender lines. And again, other than that, people perform the same task, whether it's farming, fishing, crafting, or caring for the family. And so social roles are not specialized. They're homogenous. Each individual is part of the larger collective, part of that larger, tightly knit community. So Durkheim's description of this pre-modern societies reveal a kind of unity, not formed by diversity, but by similarity. And uncoincidentally, this unity was reinforced through what was more of repressive laws at the time, where the criminal justice system was much more harsh and much more brutal, where harsh measures were designed to punish those who deviate from societal norms because it threatened the solidarity of the group. It threatened the very existence of the group. It threatened their very collective consciousness. So if someone steps out of line, society works swiftly to bring them back into conformity. There's no room for the outsider. And this level of integration works because everyone is basically the same. Of course, there is this great transition from organic solidarity in pre-modern times to the birth of modernity. And of course, this change is inevitable. And this change was brought about in large part due to industrialization, the rise of factories, urbanization, and technological progress that starts to transform this social landscape. And so as people begin to move out from more rural areas and rural farms into bustling urban cities, the simplicity of mechanical solidarity gives way to something more complex, something that Durkheim calls organic solidarity. And unlike mechanical solidarity, which is built on sameness, organic solidarity is founded on interdependence, where everyone is interdependent on one another for all the specialized roles and skills that they possess in a highly technological type of society. So here, individuals don't perform the same tasks. Instead, they specialize. Each person has a unique role, contributing to the larger web of society. And each person's specialized role contributes to the overall production of the society. Think of a hospital, of all the different specialized roles that are necessary to make a big hospital go. You need your radiologist, you need the nurses, you need highly specialized doctors on just about every aspect of the human body. You need people that fix the machines, you need the custodians, you need hundreds of different specialized roles and skills, highly specialized roles and skills, to all work together to make it a successful hospital. Well, this is like a microcosm. This hospital is a microcosm of the larger society. And so you can even think of a city. While one person might be a teacher, another is a doctor, and third is a factory worker, a pharmacist, and so on and so on. And these roles are diverse, and society's strength lies in the fact that we all rely on one another to fulfill our specialized needs so that society can function properly. This is the essence of modern society. Diversity bound by mutual interdependence. However, this new way of life isn't without its challenges, and indeed, it is fraught with dangers. As societies become more complex, they become more fragmented. The rise of cities and the growth of industries not only introduce diverse experiences, but also a greater sense of heightened individuality. The collective conscience begins to erode. It weakens because people are no longer united by these shared values, ideas, beliefs, and traditions. Instead, their personal beliefs, and indeed the emergence of their identities become more dynamic. They become more fluid, and they're less anchored in traditional norms. Laws evolve too. No longer are they just repressive, they become restitutive, focused on restoring the balance and mediating conflicts between individuals. The state no longer punishes deviance so much as it tries to find solutions to the new types of conflict that arise in a modern, diverse world. Yet still, anomie is this idea of normlessness in modern life. And this is the dark side of modernity. Anomie, terror, dread, isolation, meaninglessness, reality disorientation. And as society moves from the familiar rhythm of pre-modern life into the complexity of modern existence, it's not just social roles and structures that change, the very foundation of norms and values start to unravel. And this sense of moral clarity that once guided people begins to fall apart. It begins to break down. It begins to erode. And so anomie is the condition of normlessness. It's a state where the guiding moral compass of society erodes. And in modern life, this happens with traditional structures as family, religion, and community lose their grip on the individual. That is, the individual no longer feels a sense of connection to family, to religion, to community, to their very social institutions, and they're left on their own devices. This disintegration, it leads to a feeling of being adrift where the moorings become loosened. People are in this state of uncertainty and ambiguity. People are no longer sure of where they fit, of who they are, what they're supposed to believe, and what they're supposed to do, and how they're supposed to behave. This rapid pace of industrialization, urbanization, and technological innovation leaves them in a sense of disorientation. And this idea of anomie is profound. It's a place where there's without clear norms, where individuals experience this sense of confusion and alienation and a disconnect. They feel disconnected from society around them, unsure of their purpose, unsure of any meaning, lost in a world of competing values and ideas and beliefs. And this sense of purposelessness can spiral into a deep, both social and psychological state of being, a deep sense of confusion, where we find high rates of crime, high rates of suicide, high rates of mental health crisis. Indeed, the very pathologies that define the modern world. So as the collective consciousness weakens, social disorder rises. And individuals turn to deviance as the means of coping with this uncertainty become more and more difficult as we advance forward into modernity, into a postmodern society. So this crisis of modernity is the very thing that leads to the rise of social disorganization. So, and it's not just about the individual, the human being feeling despair, suffering, reality disorientation, meaninglessness, and isolation. It's also about the consequences of an entire society. And we're talking about the collapse of an entire social order. Traditional structures are no longer able to provide the stability that once anchored people to their society, to their institutions, to their community, to their religion, to their schools, to their very family. And so traditional structures collapse, and they're no longer able to provide the stability that people need, leading to increased social problems and social unrest. People, again, no longer know how to act. So they act in ways that deviate from established norms, contributing to the breakdown of the very fabric of society. So, to review, the central characteristics of pre-modern society held together by mechanical solidarity. It was a time of social cohesion, where society is united by similarities among individuals. Members share common values, beliefs, traditions, and norms, which create a sense of community. There is a strong sense of solidarity, or social cohesion, that arises from homogeneity and sameness, with individuals performing the same tasks and roles. The social structure is very simple, with a very uniform division of labor. People typically perform the same tasks, and often in familiar or small community settings. And there is a strong sense of collective consciousness, with a high sense of an understanding of one's morals, values, and beliefs, where social norms are integrated into the society, and where the collective consciousness of the group dominates the consciousness of the individual, leading to a high sense of conformity. People's identities are solid and fixed, and the legal system is based on repressive laws focused on punishment for deviance to maintain social order, and conformity is strictly enforced to ensure the homogeneity of the society. And social integration comes from shared experiences and lifestyles, resulting in a close-knit community. And so again, this is an example of tribal societies and early agrarian communities. Now, of course, with the world wars and industrialization, the central characteristics of the modern society is held together by organic solidarity. And here are its fundamental characteristics. Social cohesion is done through interdependence, created through diverse roles and functions that form the foundation of what holds society together. In other words, society is held together by difference, especially with the specialized roles that everyone brings to the table. Individuals rely on each other for goods, services, and specialized tasks, and it's all about heterogeneity and difference that creates social cohesion. The type of solidarity one has is through a type of social cohesion, through interdependence of individuals performing different roles and tasks. There's a complex social structure with a high division of labor. People perform specialized tasks, leading to varied experiences and roles. The weaker collective consciousness is due to greater individualism that becomes more highly dynamic and fluid. There's more tolerance now for diverse values, beliefs, and lifestyles. Just go to New York City, for example. The legal system is defined by restitutive laws focused on restoring balance and regulating interactions between individuals, and the laws are designed to mediate conflicts and compensation rather than punishment. And integration comes through cooperation and mutual dependence in complex economic and social systems. And so this, of course, is the modern industrialized and post-industrialized urban societies. And so, again, a little bit of review. Anomie is a state of normlessness, or a breakdown of social norms and values within society. It occurs when the individual feels disconnected from the collective consciousness, leading to instability, alienation, and deviant behavior. And the causes of this anomie is rooted in social transformation, in particular, the rapid social changes such as industrialization, technological advancements, and shifts in cultural values. The breakdown of traditional social structures and institutions, which once provided guidance and cohesion. And the disparities between social expectations and individual capacities to meet those expectations, especially in times of economic, political, or social upheaval. And of course, the effects of the individual are confusion, alienation, purposelessness, meaninglessness, reality disorientation, difficulty in finding a sense of belonging and connection and direction within society, and increased likelihood of engaging in non-traditional behaviors and roles, or you can even say deviant behaviors. And so the impact on society as modernity increases and as anomie increases, there's going to be an increased rate of social problems such as crime, suicide, and mental health issues. There's also a social instability as the coherence of collective norms and values continues to weaken. And so let's now apply these ideas to understand crime, delinquency, and other types of social problems. So first, I'm going to take you to the 1920s Chicago School. I believe that the Chicago School, the 1920s, was one of the heydays of sociology in the United States. Probably the 1960s would be the other heyday, and I ain't seen another heyday since then. But nonetheless, what the Chicago School theorists did, they were interested in understanding social problems. in particular crime and deviancy. And so they wanted to apply this idea of anomie. Although they didn't use it in the same way as Durkheim, they kind of had their own take and twist on their concept of anomie. And they were used it to explain social problems that occurred in the community. In particular, looking at Chicago. I mean, these social theorists had right outside their window a big urban setting in which to understand the human social world. And so they had their students go out into the communities, get the seat of their pants dirty, and understand social life through firsthand experiences and observations. And one of the things that they did was actually create these concentric circles around the city of Chicago, and they called them zones. And so they had Zone 1 of Chicago, which was the Loop area, the central business district. Zone 2 was the zone of transition, experiencing industrial expansion. It was largely inhabited by migrants, whether they be black people escaping southern brutality and terrorism, and seeking safety as well as jobs in the north. Or it was immigrants from Ireland and all over the world, all over Europe and Asia coming into the city in search for work. And so, Zone 2, what they call the zone of transition, it's where a lot of the jobs were, but also where a lot of the dilapidated homes were and a lot of vacant housings. And so people would move into Zone 2 when they first got a job in the manufacturing facilities of Chicago, but as soon as they were able to make enough shekels, they would leave Zone 2 and go into the Zones 3, 4, and 5. So Zone 3 of the concentric circle was more of a working class homes. It was single family tenements. A lot of renters, but more stable. So just think of more working class, blue collar, humble types of homes and apartment complexes. And when they could save even more money, a lot of the families would move from Zone 3 to Zone 4, which was it was more like a residential zone. Single-family homes and upscale kind of yuppie apartments with, yards and garages and, lattes, right? And artisanal mayonnaise and craft beer. And then you had Zone 5, and that's the suburbs, the commuter area. And you know what suburbs look like. I think that they look like awful places. I can't stand them, where you see Starbucks and Applebee's and Blue Navy and Red Lobster and the same chain stores over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. The place of just outright, my God, boring. But people would move there for bigger houses, more space, and the perception of better schools, etc., etc. So Zone 1 was the central business district, the Loop, where there were some of the manufacturing facilities. Zone 2, this is where more of the manufacturing facilities were, but also deteriorated housings, abandoned buildings. It was poor, it was dilapidated. People would move in and get the hell out as soon as they could. And so we have to ask then, so the ideas are this, right? Social disorganization and anomie contribute to social problems like crime and the growth of the underground economy. Disorganized social structures like, disorganized schools that aren't working together with other community organizations that aren't working together with the family, etc. These kind of create the conditions of anomie. And anomie leads to insecurity and uncertainty, leaving individuals with a sense of normlessness, causing social problems. And so one of the things that they noticed that in Zone 2, again, Zone 1, CBD, Zone 2, transitional zone, recent immigrant groups, southern black people, deteriorated housing factors, abandoned buildings. Zone 3, working class zones, single family tenements. Zone 4, residential zones, yuppies, single family homes, nice apartments, yards, garages. And Zone 5, commuter zones. They noticed that in Zone 2, the zone of transition, there was always a high level of crime, deviance, transgression, and delinquency. And they wanted to know why. Now, keep in mind, criminological theory at the time is not too far different from today now, but criminological theory at the time, these people were measuring skull sizes and body types and stuff, right? And so, and also looking at the melanin level in people's skin, and so crime was always seen as something related to the shape of your skull or your body type or the level of melanin in your skin. And so there was a big question. Why, in the zone of transition, there's a constant and permanently high rate of crime, delinquency, transgression, and deviance when the groups of people, the different groups of people in Zone 2 are constantly moving in and out? That is, the Irish come in, high rates of crime and delinquency. And people thinking, oh, those damn Irish Celtic ape-like creatures, they'll never assimilate into the decency of the white man's culture. And yet, after a generation or two, they assimilate, but also they move out of Zone 2. Then the Polish come in. Crime rates remain high. Damn, those Poles coming in causing all this crime. Poles go out. The Hungarians come in. High rates of crime. Right? And each different ethnic group would come in. Jewish people would come in, high rates of crime. Then they would leave. Another group would come in, high rates of crime. Then they would leave. Another group would come in. Hispanic groups, high rates of crime. Then they would leave. Another group would come in. Southern black people, high rates of crime. Then they would leave. Another group would come in, and high rates of crime. No matter what the level of melanin in one's skin, no matter their race or their ethnicity, constantly high rates of crime. So what gives? What gives? It has nothing to do with ethnicity or immigration. Nothing to do with the level of melanin in someone's skin, or nothing to do with their education or anything like that. Rather, they were able to make an argument that because there was so much transition in Zone 2 of people constantly moving in and moving out of that area, that there was no time for that community to develop a sense of social cohesion, a sense of social solidarity, a strong sense of a collective consciousness that integrates everyone into their community. In other words, a community needs time to develop a sense of collective efficacy, where the universities are working with the high schools, are working with the primary schools, are working with the churches, are working with the YWCA, are working with the YMCA, are working with the at-risk community centers, and working with other community organizations that are all working together for the betterment of the community, where every stakeholder, every person in the community has something to give, has something to offer. They have a sense of meaning and belonging in that community, where all of one's talents and abilities go to working together with other community organizations to integrate people into the social order of the community, where everybody has a sense of belonging and everyone is working together for the smooth functioning of a healthy community. When in Zone 3 and Zone 4 and Zone 5, you have time. People are buying houses. They're working together. The teachers are working with the professors, are working with the medical doctors, are working with the police officers, are working with the at-risk youth centers, are working with other community organizations, all working together with that time to be there, to build a sense of community, to build this collective efficacy. They all have time to build these networks of support, integrating people into the community for the smooth functioning of the community. But in Zone 2, where people are constantly moving in and moving out, this collective efficacy fails to develop. So there's no sense of community. There's no sense of solidarity. There's no sense of social cohesion. And when people lose this sense of cohesion, this sense of community, this connection to people, this connection to community organizations. They feel this anomie. Anomie becomes creeping up, and anomie becomes to define the whole space. People are left in this feeling of normlessness, of uncertainty, of precariousness, of this lack of belonging, this lack of connection. And so they feel this sense of anomie, precariousness, and uncertainty, and this leads to depression, mental illness, suicide, crime, delinquency, and deviance. Now, if this theory is true, how do you solve the problem of crime and delinquency in Zone 2? Take those damn immigrants, put them in prison? Wrong answer. If this theory of anomie is true, then we need to find a way to restore, in Zone 2, to restore this sense of belonging, to restore a sense of social cohesion, to restore a sense of social solidarity, to bring people back into the community, to give them a stake in the community, to give them a sense of belonging in the community. So you need schools to work together with universities to create after-school programs, sporting programs, community events, church festivities, festivals, police working with artists, working with musicians, working with writers and professors, and every other community organization, all working together to integrate everybody into the community. They can all work together to give everyone this sense of connection and this sense of belonging. You can erode the crime problem by simply erasing the conditions that create anomie. You don't need one police officer or one cage to put a human being in to solve these social problems. Police can be a helping hand in preserving the collective efficacy of the group and that sense of social solidarity. Arrests don't need to be made. Reduce anomie, you reduce suffering, you reduce crime, you reduce deviance, you reduce delinquency, you reduce mental health issues, right? You ease the suffering of people that cause the social problems that plague the world. And so this is one very practical way to apply this idea of anomie to solve real-world social problems, to end the suffering of our brothers and sisters. And so there's another theorist, Robert Merton, who wrote a beautiful article called Social Structure and Anomie. And here he had a very creative use, I think, of this sociological imagination. That is, to understand how structural issues create personal troubles for the individual. Personal troubles that they did not create, but nonetheless inherited and must deal with. And so, some of the key ideas here is that anomie results in inconsistencies between two institutions, right? The cultural goals of the society and the legitimate institutional means to achieve those goals. And so, for Merton, he looked at why people conform and why people might innovate. Right? And so he believed that every society has a sense of cultural goals and has a way or a path for people to legitimately achieve the cultural goals of society. So, pray tell, what are the cultural goals of American society? Well, it's the American dream. To acquire the finer things of life. Fancy cars, bling jewelry, nice clothes, cappuccinos and lattes, right? To be rich, to be wealthy, to live like a celebrity, right? Big houses and fancy cars. That's the cultural goals of society. The American dream, the finer things in life. And so, I ain't judging none. If that's the cultural goals of society, that's their business, right? And so, no problem so long that society offers people the legitimate institutional paths to achieve those desired cultural goals. And of course, something that many of us have been told since we was little, that you pick yourself up by your bootstraps, and through education and hard work, industriousness, that we go through going to school, going to the university, and working hard. We are given the legitimate institutional path to achieve those cultural goals, to acquire the finer things in life. And so, when we agree to the cultural goals of society and have access to the institutional means to achieve those goals, we conform. Because hell, why wouldn't we? If we conform, we're going to get the goods. So, no problem. You ain't got no crime in such a situation like that. Now, the problem arises when people accept the cultural goals of society, but are denied or excluded from the institutional means that achieve those goals. Now, some of my conservative brothers and sisters might say, well, who the hell's denied these access to these institutional resources that make you acquire the finer things in life? And the way I like to say it is, if you go to some kind of regular state university, you're going to a university that's going to give you access to, well, let's just put it this way, middle-class universities help you get middle-class jobs. You ain't going to become rich, chances are anyway. You'll become a teacher, cop or something, or, some type of office worker, engineer, architect, lawyer, things like that, right? No, nothing wrong with them things, right? But that's what you're going to become. But if you really wanted to achieve the American dream, why aren't you in Harvard, Yale, and Princeton? Well, you don't go there to become a police officer. You go there to transform criminal justice policy. You don't go there to become a lawyer. You go there to transform the legal system, to create legal policies, right? To make and decide the laws that are going to govern the world is what you do, right? You don't go there to become a teacher. You go there to become the creator of educational policy. And so, why then, if you want to achieve the American dream, are you going to some state university at Harvard, Yale, and Princeton? Is it because you're stupid? You ain't so smart? No, of course not. Nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that you were denied or excluded from the inner circles of power and wealth. And because of that, you only had access to middle-class institutions that give you access to middle-class jobs. And so, the same way that the typical university student might be excluded from those inner circles of power and wealth of Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, you have a lot of people that are also excluded from the mainstream middle-class institution due to no fault of their own. Right? And so the problem then becomes you have people that agree with the cultural goals of society, and they want their chance at, the pie. They want their chance to acquire the finer things in life, to become somebody, spread their wings, strut their stuff, and become great. Have a lot of money, have wealth, and live the American dream. Except they have been excluded or denied access to the institutional means to achieve those desired cultural goals. So what do you think they're going to do? Say, oh, well, I give up. I ain't going to do nothing. I'll be a loser. Well, actually, Merton had a rule for that. He called them the retreatists. Well, not the retreatists, sorry, the ritualists. The people that follow the social rules, but they long gave up on the rules. And you got retreatists that both reject the cultural goals and the means and just say, I'm getting out of here. They withdraw from society, go live off the grid or something like that, right? Join some commune somewhere. Or, they become rebels too, where they just kind of reject the goals and means, and they seek alternative systems on their own. But others, and the point that interests us here, become innovators. They accept the cultural goals of society, but since they have been denied or excluded from the legitimate institutional means to achieve those goals, they find innovative paths. In other words, they got to come up with a way out of no way. They got to come up with their own means They have to create their own organization or their own institutions in order to achieve those desired goals. Excluded from the university, excluded from those jobs that will get you the higher, the finer things in life. Well, they can develop an illicit underground economy, whether it be the drug business, or the smuggling business, or the arms business, or whatever it might be. They go to the illicit underground economy. They create their own institutions. They create their own path. They create their own organizations in which to find alternative, illegitimate paths to achieve the desired cultural goals. They're innovators, and that's called criminal. So if that is true, this contradiction between achieving the cultural goals and institutional means creates anomie. Because this is another idea of anomie. You accept the cultural goals. You want to get it, you want to get it, you want to get it. You want to go there like everybody else. But you deny the institutional means, you're in a space of uncertainty, right? You've been denied something that you want to get. It's precarious. You could become poor. Your dreams could be lost. You could become a loser and become a failure in life. This is anomie. And so they have to do something to get rid of that anomie. So they innovate, find the illicit underground economy, and they fight against their structural exclusion and find a path to achieve those cultural goals. And so, what are we supposed to do to the innovator? Put them in jail, and in jail, and in jail? Well, how many people have we put in jail? Well, the United States is probably the largest penal colony in the world. And how well is that working for us? So, if this theory is true, and I believe a good argument can be made for it, if you actually want to end crime, delinquency, deviance, whatever, then you have to resolve the structural contradiction between the cultural goals and institutional means. And you can either do that by changing the cultural goals of society, but we all know that ain't going to happen. Or we can give everyone access to the institutional means, the legitimate institutional means to achieve those goals, and then the structural contradictions that create anomie that lead to crime wouldn't exist. Those contradictions would be resolved. People would accept the cultural goals, have access to the institutional means, and therefore conform. Crime rates go down, dissipate to almost nothing, and no one had to go to jail. No one had to go sit in some cage. In other words, the problem of crime is a problem that exists at a structural level that can only be remedied at a structural level. So here's now how we could take this wonderful and brutal concept of anomie and apply it in two ways to understand crime, transgression, delinquency, and social problems. One through that zone of transition that causes anomie, and one through the structural contradiction between cultural goals and institutional means that cause anomie. The answer to resolving social problems that create suffering that leads to crime and mental health problems is to resolve the anomie that exists in zone 2 and to resolve the structural contradictions that create anomie with cultural goals and institutional means. And that'll be my talk for today. Thank you very much.